Hi, this is Joseph with Isaac.
Hi, this is Isaac.
Thanks very much for joining us on the Iron Rod podcast. We're in episode 8. 8 looking great, I always say. And we're talking about the Germans again. And you may say, again? Yes, the Germans are very fascinating. And part of the reason they're fascinating, or maybe in my view the primary reason, is insofar as they interact with the Romans.
But they're so much interesting on their own.
Insofar as they react with the West in general, and you could almost say that we are, the West today, almost Germanic in nature, perhaps.
You would say so. I mean, all the European nations that made up the West as it is today, and eventually made up America as it is today, were at least partially Germanic. We have the French. Obviously, they get the name from the Frankish Confederation of German tribes from the Rhineland. You have the Italians, who descends partially from the Lombards, or in the old name, the Langobards, a confederacy named after the Longbeards. You have the English, or the Engels are the old name that they carry with them from what is now Denmark, tells you. And of course we can bring up the Celtic nations, but the Celtic nations also were Germanized to a great deal through the Anglo-Saxon and Norman and Norse invasions into whatever was left of the Celtic land in England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales.
Yes, so...
and so forth and so on.
So this reminds... Everyone knows the Spider-Man meme, where Spider-Man looks at himself, and there's... So in fact, when we're looking at the Germans, we're looking at ourselves. And another instance, if in everyday conversation, is that the days of the week are German, or at least 4 of them are.
Let's see. Sunday, Monday, that's not necessarily German.
So Sunday, Monday is, I think, literally sun and moon.
Yes, quite literally. But then you
and Saturday is Saturn, which is
Saturn
these 3 are Roman.
Saturday is definitely Roman. It's the last one who is totally Roman. But then you have
the other 4 are
Tuesday. Mm-hmm. That's after Zeus, who was the father of all men. Who was, in some legends, he is the father of all men. The Romans thought it's a misunderstanding. He was Odysseus in disguise. In other version, he is a different deity. Sometimes he described as the chief deity. It's possible that at a certain point he was the chief deity of the Germanics before Odin became the chief deity. Then you have Wednesday, after the old grey-beard, one-eye himself, Odin, or Wotan, as the ancient Anglo-Saxons would have called him. And then you have Thursday. Now, here's a mistake. Then you have, of course, you have Friday, after Odin's wife, Freya. But then you have Thursday. Thursday is an interesting case because a lot of people assume Thursday named after Thor. But actually, in the Germanic mythology, a Thurs is not necessarily Thor. Thor is a Thurs, but so are all the other gods. It's a term for a powerful spirit. Usually malevolent. And if you use that, and you can use this term of the entities we call gods, Germanic gods, but it's not necessarily so. But it's not necessarily a flattering term. Think of the term demon, or something like that. So we could say, in certain mythologies, some demons are good and some demons are bad. And you can say, or spirit. Yeah, you can say that a god is a spirit, but it's not really a flattering term. It's not really a good term that you would use usually. So Thursday is the day of Thor, and the reason, but it's also the day of Thyrsus, the day of spirits in general.
Yes, this is why I like to avoid Thursdays. I want to avoid the spirits. Yeah. But so we see in everyday conversation that as many as 4 days a week are in fact named after the Vikings or their ancestors, the Germans, and when I say that we're looking at ourselves and we're looking at the Germans, that is in fact my main interest in them. And in that regard, let me read to you a bit of a quote I have here in front of me, and I'm quoting an earlier episode. Our first episode on the Germans, where we talked about some of these things, and we even mentioned Thursday in fact, was we talked about the Germans and their interaction with the Romans. And here's something that Isaac said in that particular episode. He said, the Germans were the Roman foil and nightmare and mirror of virtue. They are either avenging angels of the gods ready to visit terrible punishment on the corrupt empire. They are demons from the pagan Roman version of hell, or from the Christian Roman hell. They are better than us. They are worse than us. Their civilization is a mirror of our forefathers, or maybe they are completely foreign to us. They are savages. They are noble defenders of the empire. They are enemies and they are friends. What are they? And I thought that this was profound, and this is something that we only touched on briefly, and maybe we could expound on a bit more. And let me give two opposite facts. Fact number one, that during the time of arguably the first, although some people would say Julius Caesar was the first emperor of the Romans, but his grandnephew is often given that title, the famous Augustus. Augustus's personal bodyguard was comprised of German warriors. Mm-hmm. And we spoke before about how 1,000 years later this was still going on in the Byzantine Empire and in other places where you would have the elite bodyguard of the emperor protecting the emperor or the king would be from foreign extract. And this makes, perfect sense. You don't want someone who has some sort of vested interest in who takes over. You don't want someone who's connected by blood so they themselves can never seize power.
You don't want anyone who have any political prospect. So you take foreigners. Foreigners cannot become emperor. By the way, Emperor Tiberius learned it the hard way. He, at the last moment, he foiled a coup by his own Praetorian Guard, which of course were the Roman contingent of the Imperial Guard, and officially they were the emperor's companions, they were the emperor's direct underlings. But at the last but Emperor Tiberius caught the commander at the last moment plotting to take over the empire. And Tiberius was a suspicious and cruel man before. It became worse after that.
Unfortunately, this did not start a trend. The Praetorian Guard would stay for a while longer, and especially in the 3rd century, when I'm thinking the crisis of the 3rd century,
was largely because of them.
It was largely because you have, emperors chosen by the military, and the military that's in Rome is the Praetorian Guard oftentimes.
So you have...
Theoretically, they're the only soldiers who are allowed to carry weapons in the Eternal City itself.
Yes, absolutely. So you have 3 elements that choose the emperor. You have the Senate, you have the army, and you have the Praetorian Guard who become their own thing. They have their own administration. They don't have their own rank system, but they have their own uniform. They are a completely different thing from the army that actually is doing the fighting. The Praetorian Guard does very little in the way of fighting.
There goes another myth from the video game.
Of course, the Praetorian Guard is chosen from the elite of the army. Nobody, some people, some very young and connected officers, but usually, if you are talking about the rank and file, they are chosen from the cream of the crop of the army as a whole. But once you are a Praetorian, you stay a Praetorian, and unless the emperor goes into war himself, which doing a civil, I said
it was common during certain eras. I'm thinking 2nd century.
Yes, or especially during a civil war, then you go to war. But in peacetime, or when the routine fighting that the Roman Empire is doing just to maintain their borders and do what certain modern military thinkers call lawn mowing inside enemy territory, the Praetorian Guard has no part in it.
Right. I mean, obviously, if there's fighting in Rome, where the Praetorian Guard is stationed, then you're in trouble. So I mentioned the Praetorian Guard in contrast to the Germanics who guarded Augustus, and other Roman emperors were guarded in the same fashion. I think under Nero, after Nero's untimely demise, his successor disbanded the Germanic guardsmen because they were apparently too close to him and so on, and maybe they came back later. So, factual point number one, you have the Germans being right at the center of the Roman Empire. They're the soldiers, and they are doing the fighting for the Romans. And you could speak about them fighting in the auxiliary. You could speak about them fighting as barbarian allies, which is a separate thing. You could speak about them at the end of the Roman Empire, comprising even most of the actual legionaries.
Or as the German as the Germanic leader, rather Batavian leader, who had the wonderfully German name of Julius Civilis, obviously meaning Julius the citizen in Latin, said to his supporters, to his Germanic supporters, in the blood of the provinces had the provinces conquered.
Interesting. Yeah, the Batavians themselves, were not taxed. This was a pretty fierce Germanic tribe, and in exchange they gave their troops to the Romans. I think as much as 50% of their young adults would fight, in the Roman military.
Yes.
They eventually had a pretty violent revolution. They had tremendous success,
led by former auxiliary officers.
Right. If you were paying attention in episode 7, you've seen this movie before. So which brings us to the other contrasting factual, in that the Germans, and this is what you say, they are noble defenders of the empire. They are friends. And so on and so forth. And at the same time, they are a nightmare.
They are barbarians.
They are barbarians.
They are the most barbarian that anybody can be.
And they are demons from the pagan Roman version of hell. We spoke previously, and we don't have to go on, but we spoke previously about the massacre of 3 legions by the Germanics in Teutoburg Forest. So, we have these two separate ideas floating around. How do we kind of synchronize something that seems so inconsistent?
Well, we synchronize because if we remember the difference between the Greco-Roman civilization and essentially all Mediterranean civilization before that, and the Germanic civilization, or civilizations I should say, the point of all Mediterranean civilization was to be understood, to be comprehensible. Of course, you had mystery cults whose entire goal was to keep a secret among a small group, but inside the small group, the entire idea was understanding. We should understand each other. We who are good enough to share the secret should share it and understand it fully. And we should be completely understood and open with each other. And also, the entire reason you'll have a mystery cult and for them to be so subversive is because you live in a culture of openness and transparency and everything being understood and in the open and declaratory. But the Germanics are different. In the Germanic world, you don't want to be understood. Nobody wants to be understood. People wear a veil, and over the veil they wear a hood, and over the hood they wear a wide-brimmed hat to cover their face even further. And if that's not enough, they make sure to walk among other people at night, at starless nights, and speak in riddles. That's, my friend, is the description of Odin the Wanderer, the chief god of the Germanics. And we'll turn to you after our theme.
These are good places. Our gods live here, in the trees and rivers. They watch over us. We are happy. We hunt. We love. We have families, homes, a good life. But sometimes we must fight. The Romans disturb the gods. They burn the forests. They take what is ours, wives, children, land. And the Romans talk of how they will help us and protect us. They put us to sleep with golden promises. When we wake, all we had is gone, stolen. They take our sons and turn them into little Romans. Ha! So we fight to keep what is ours. What must stay ours. There can be no peace. No peace with Romans, men of stone and iron and lies. There can be only war.
I think
Well-
that encapsulates a bit what many of the barbarians were thinking.
No. Apart from the most zealot druids, I don't think anyone would have put the German position, if we can even say there was a Germanic or even a barbarian position in those terms. No. Creative Assembly, the people who make Total War and made this intro, do usually have very good work, but this is completely ahistorical. Or actually, ironically, that's the way the Romans, that's the way Tacitus, the Roman historian, thought that the Germans see the Romans. But it's not the actual way the Germanics saw the Romans.
Yes. Although, maybe a German viewpoint in the 2nd century AD would be different than the 2nd century BC. Maybe the more primordial Germans saw it this way.
In the 2nd century
AD, Tacitus is right.
Well, in the 2nd century AD, if anything, they started to Romanize it even more.
Right, so I'm saying maybe the earlier, more primordial Germans had this attitude.
The more primordial Germans don't have this attitude because they have no problem hiring themselves out to the Romans to fight against other Germanics.
Yeah, some of them.
Or against Gauls. And they don't view Rome with such contempt and hatred and resentment.
Right. I mean, there are always different factions.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even at Teutoburg Forest, there was one German tribe that tried to warn the Romans from the ambush.
I don't think that there is any Germanic faction that would actually describe the conflict this way, or the series of conflicts, because we see the same Germanic groups sometimes on the side of the Romans, sometimes not. They are very opportunistic.
Fascinating. Regardless of that, it does mention the Roman gods, and you before mentioned Odin as the cloaked, forbidding, mysterious figure.
Yes.
And some people, in fact, just say he was an old magician, not even a quote-unquote deity. So what more can you tell us about Odin that we need to know, especially vis-a-vis the Romans?
Well, here's an interesting thing about Odin. Odin had a father, we know his name, Bur, sons of Buri, and Bur died. We are not sure, it's not clear in the myth if he died a natural death or if he died in war, but he died. And Odin took his place. And Odin was not born with all his wisdom and power like the Greek gods who already have their power innate to them. No. Odin, for example, had to buy his wisdom and his knowledge of magic.
So before our audience may think that he bought it in the conventional fashion, he had to go through some pretty heinous stuff, like hanging himself up by a tree for some wisdom or something.
Yes, our source to that is the sayings of Har, in which a man named Gingelferi, which means way-weary, a man who is tired of walking, is coming to the hall of Odin, and then he sees that there are three lords to the house. There's Har, there's High, just as high, and Har. Har or Yar means someone elevated, we actually touched upon it when we discussed Arminius and the name that he was not his name, that was attributed to him, Herman, which we know why he couldn't have been called Herman, but Yar means somebody elevated. And all these three lords are actually the same person. They are Odin. And then Odin start counting his names, the many names that he acquired during his many years, and one of them is Gingel Fairy. So wait, is Gingel Fairy the guest, or is he the same as Odin the host? What is that? What is that supposed to mean? How can he be the guest and the host at the same time? How can he be asking the question and giving the answer at the same time? What's going on in here? Or maybe it's just or maybe Odin is toying with his guest when he calls himself by the same name that the guest chose for himself, because the guest's name is also not Gingolferi. He's just chosen this name to hide his true identity, according to the story. But among the other thing that Odin tells his quote unquote guest is that the way he acquired his knowledge of his sacred runes by which he can perform all magic in the world is by giving his right eye to the giant Hymir and by sacrificing himself to himself, by hanging himself and falling on and stabbing himself with his own spear and staying hung and stabbed this way for a day and a night.
So for those of us who have the famous idea of the Christians and embracing of the sacrifice and so on, is this simply such a primordial element that they both appear, or is there any sort of
There's an argument.
influence?
There's an argument. One argument is that there's no argument that a bunch of first century Jews who probably never saw a German in their life, and if they were, they would not engage with him about his native beliefs. That they knew about this myth of Odin, if it was still around, if this myth was not existed already. The other thing is that so either this myth developed independently, or the Germanic pagans saw the story of the crucifixion and adopted it to their own need. They thought a god. So the Christians believed that a god sacrificed
himself to defeat his greatest enemy and win a great victory over. Okay, we don't get it, but okay, so that sounds cool. We get that sounds cool. Our God definitely did it.
I wonder if anything could be made of the fact that what is they're both embracing this torture, and Jesus is doing that for salvation or for some other type thing, and Odin is doing it for wisdom.
Well, the thing is, the pagans don't understand Christianity. That's the thing. Christianity grows, which we'll talk about it in a later episode, grows out of Judaism. Judaism is all about altruism. It's all about your duties to your fellow man and to your God. It's very, very selfless. Paganism is very selfish. It's selfish not in the individualistic sense. It's not egoistic, but it's selfish in the sense that you are trying to achieve something for yourself, for your kin, for your tribe, and you try to advance you and what you stand for in the world. And also pagans are also not big on the whole concept of guilt and of sin. They don't really understand. They understand shame and honor. They understand weakness and strength. They understand wisdom and foolishness. They don't really understand. Nobody really understands guilt. This thing that gnaws you from the inside because you know you did something wrong, or you know that you are inadequate even though nobody else tells you so.
That's something foreign to the pagans. So whenever they hear that Jesus, that Jesus sacrificed himself to win something, to get something, they are struggling to understand it. Nevertheless, by the way, there is strong indication, as we said before, that originally Odin was not the chief god of the Germanic pantheon, that was Zeus. But this is a topic for... But that essentially he eventually was promoted to become the head of the pantheon. But this is a really controversial topic among historians and linguists and philologists and all the other people that pour over Holland's latest translation of the Poetic Edda.
Another time then, though it does kind of remind me of an episode we had previously done about Zeus and the shift of power from Cronus to Zeus.
Yes.
And the two competing paradigms we had for that. So I'm curious if we could discuss about that in the future. Another thing to possibly discuss in the future is your mention of something that divides the civilized world, the Judeo-Christians, with the pagans, not honor, which they both have concepts on and so on, or shame, but rather guilt.
Yes.
And this is something that one could venture to say has really kind of swallowed up civilization today in a sort of remarkable fashion that even the Romans did not have. And this is perhaps something we could discuss sometime, how this came to be and if it is a positive or negative attribute. But the Germans did not have guilt. They did have honor, and they did have, as far as altruism, you remind me of I think it's Tacitus who has the passage about gift giving. That they don't expect gifts back, but they, love the institution, so to speak, and they give gifts to everyone.
Yeah, they give gifts, but they don't give gifts out of altruism. For one of the poetic expression, so in Norse and generally in Germanic poetry, you sometimes substitute a word for a poetic expression. For example, God in Anglo-Saxon Christian poetry, God is sometimes called the monk's hope. In the saga of Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway, warriors are sometimes called battle trees because they're tall as trees and they are in battle, so they are battle trees. So one of the poetic expression for king is gift giver, or arm-ring giver, or ring giver, or ring lord, or as you may notice, something that sounds a lot like the title of a certain excellent novel that was finished being writing in the 30s by a certain English expert in Germanic languages.
Don't keep me in suspense. You're talking about Tolkien.
I had to drop Tolkien here. I'm sorry. I am a fan.
It's always important to drop Tolkien. So there we have it. Anything else to mention before we move on to our next segment, where we will further discuss the Germans and how they interacted with the Roman Empire?
So we kind of touched upon it, but let me reiterate it again. Mediterranean civilization is all about understanding. As we noticed on our Bronze Age episode, the beginning of civilization in the Fertile Crescent is when we started to have public, open accounting of what the king collected in his royal treasure, and this accounting is not hidden in some archive that you can access only between Monday to Thursdays between 9:30 in the morning and 1:30 in the afternoon after an appointment ahead of time. No. It's engraved, so it will stand forever on the side of every major public building. on the year such and such, there was such and such harvest, and there was such and such loot taken in war, and the gods clearly favored the king. So it's all about, it's a very exhibitionist civilization or chain of civilizations. And the reason is it's because it's settled, it's sedentary. You know, it's completely committed to farming, and in farming culture, you need to know what belongs to who, whose ox is that, whose field, where my field starts and your fields begins. And even if we live in a more communal or communistic type of thing, you say, okay, how much the king, how much of the harvest belongs to the king, how much do you may keep for yourself. Everything needs to be known for civilization to function. But the Germanics are not fully farming, because the German lands are not very suitable for farming yet in the way that the Mediterranean lands are. They are the great forests of Central and Eastern and Northern Europe were not cleared yet. The great marshes were not dry yet.
Which is very helpful in battle.
Yes.
Of course, all the ambushes, and you have the Romans. After the Teutoburg Forest, there was tremendous campaigns of vengeance that the Romans inflicted upon the Germans. One of the people leading that was the emperor you mentioned before, Emperor Tiberius.
Uh-huh.
And during one of the battles that the Romans managed to fight somewhat on a level playing field, literally and metaphorically, the Roman soldiers were shouting at the Germans saying, you don't have your marshes and your forests now, because the Germans had such an advantage in fighting those ambush battles.
Yeah.
So definitely helpful for fighting battles, less helpful for farming.
Of course, the Germanics did not think that they were fighting unfair, or even if they were thinking they were fighting unfair, they wouldn't care. Fighting unfair is fun, but
I think everybody could be accused of that.
As far as the Germanics are concerned, they don't have the concept of fair fight, of these set piece fights that only then they can say legitimate. That's a legitimate victory, and if you ambush from behind a tree, it's not legitimate. No, the entire point, the old Germanic strategy is based on ambush and stratagem and deceit, and what the Romans sometimes would call treachery.
But the Romans themselves were experts.
Oh yes. The Romans were hypocrites, but what can you do?
I think it takes a certain mark of civilization to know if you're being hypocritical, as opposed to just doing it.
Yes, the Germans. So in Germany, in the Germanic lands, what was important were two things. First of all, foremost, is to keep your cards as close to your chest as possible. What people should know about you? People should know that you are a scary dude, that you are that you are somebody who should not be trifled with. That's what people should know about you. So this is why you should try to go on as many adventures as possible to accumulate reputation and honor and nicknames that would make everybody terrified of you. But you also want to keep people from knowing your secrets. You don't want anyone to know where your actual family lives. Remember, you may spend years upon years on the road serving this warlord one time and the other warlords another, but your family is not. But sometimes your family is with you, but sometimes it's not. And it's not necessarily, people don't necessarily know who your native tribe is. Sometimes if you choose to brag, they will, but sometimes it's an information that you would rather keep to yourself. And you also keep to yourself where you have hidden your treasure, the things that you saved all these years, all those arm rings and gilded swords and exquisite shields, etc., and all this Roman armor. By the way, you want to hide it so nobody would steal it. One of the biggest themes in Germanic mythology and poetry is the thief and the fear of thief, as well as the fear of somebody finding your home and killing you and killing your family.
Let me mention another thing that we talked about, the uniqueness of the Germans last time, and that is how they didn't have kings or really leaders. They had consuls and they had votes and things like that. So the battle that I was just referring to, where the Romans almost were defeated, and this is again in the retaliatory campaign after Teutoburg Forest, Pontus Longi. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. It's a very fascinating battle, and we're not going to go into it. Perhaps another time, surrounding the Romans trying to get over the river with these bridges. The Germans at one point had them dead to rights. All they had to do was not attack and have the pitched battle the Romans desperately wanted. And they would have these votes, and the vote was, let's attack the Romans. And of course, the Romans thrashed them in open battle, as was their wont. Mm-hmm. And the man responsible for Teutoburg Forest, who we mentioned last time, Arminius, he was saying, don't attack them. I know the Roman system. We should not attack them. They attacked them, they lost. A Roman army would usually be commanded by a general.
Yes.
Again, you have two people. It's a confusing mess. But if you have one man in command, you would never have such a outcome. Mm-hmm. Again, the strength and limitation of having the German system of consul, which affects the Roman Empire and affects us till today.
Yes, and that's why the Germans are always, when you hear about the Franks and the Lombards, etc., and the Angles and the Saxons, those are confederacies, not tribes. Yes, they contain many tribes. For example, the people who conquer England, we call them the Anglo-Saxons. Actually, it was a hoax because it was a coalition between the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, and some Frisians that joined the fun because, it was fun conquering a Roman province, even though it was the poorest and least integrated Roman province. But it's fun. Come on, you have land, you get loot.
Fun for the whole family, they say.
Yeah, it's fun for the whole family. As a matter of fact, bring your whole family, settle on a farm.
And the point you're making is that
it's a confederacy.
Name,
it's a confederacy, and the Franks are also confederacy because Frank means free. It's a confederacy of free men, of free tribes, of free peoples. It's not a term of a people, which the Franks themselves, by the way, eventually forgot, because it was convenient for them to forget, because that there was a point in which you were just an opportunistic confederacy is to think that you are a unified people, that you are always unified, and therefore you should stay unified, which of course strengthen you as a whole.
Yes. I guess the downside is that because of that we have the modern nation of France, which may not be a net win.
Yeah, I know. The many people, many such cases.
Anti-French jokes are allowed on this podcast.
Yes.
Anyway, so before we move on to the next segment, where we will further discuss the terror of the frontier with our movie recommendation, and so on, I would like to have you join us, and this is the Iron Rod Podcast, Episode 7. See you on the other side.
Knows how to write, knows how to read, knows how to stain, how to understand, knows how to ask, knows how to offer, knows how to supplicate, knows how to sacrifice. 'Tis better unasked than offered overmuch, for aye doth a gift look for gain. 'Tis better unasked than offered overmuch. Thus did Odin write ere the earth began, when up he rose in after time. That third I know if my need be great, to fetter a foeman fell, I can dull the swords of deadly foes, that no whiles no weapons avail. That fourth I know if foemen have fettered me hand and foot, I chant a charm the chains to break, so the fetters will fly off my feet, and off my hands the halter. The fifth I know if from foeman's hand I see a spear sped into throng, never so fast it flies, but its flight I can stay, once my eye lights on it.
Hi, this is Joseph here with Isaac on episode 7. This was not a trap.
episode 8, as a matter of fact.
It is. Episode. Are we in episode 8?
Yes, we are in episode 8.
Remarkable. Wow, the time flies.
Yeah.
Our episode 7 was about the Germans. We're doing the Germans again. And you just heard Isaac, our co-host, read this lovely poem in Viz Odin. Tell us more.
Well, this is one of the... so this is in the saying of Har, which so we talked about how Odin called himself Har, high, just as high, and Har, which means elevated, highest of all. And he started haranguing his poor guest, Gangolfer, which may or may not be himself. But there's another poem called the Saying of Har, or the Proverbs of Har, or Havamal in Norse. And this is him talking about himself, his favorite, of course, Odin's favorite subject. And the last part of this poem is about all the spells he knows. And first, before he starts mentioning all these spells, he warns you. It's better not to ask than offer overmuch. He's saying what does it mean? Surely, maybe he mean we understand it's better not to ask than ask for too much, or it's better not to offer anything than offer too much or too little. But what does it mean? It's better not to ask than offer overmuch. My co-host mentioned the culture of gift giving among the Germanics. Now, gift giving is always reciprocal, which means I give you gift, you give me service. It's not a legalistic agreement.
It's not a contract.
It's not a contract, it's not an agreement. But if I give you gift and you do not serve, and you refuse to serve me, you dishonored yourself. You are proving yourself to be an unworthy man who should not be trusted. And of course, the untrustworthy man is also a trope in Germanic mythology and poetry.
Although you would think if anybody's untrustworthy, it would be the guy who shows up with the cloak and dagger stuff and the cowl and all that.
No. But you need to understand, Odin is the straight shooting, honest man in the story, because Loki, or who is also called Lopt, the swift, or the haughty, is the worst. He's the embodiment of lies and deception and everything else that have to do with making people think one thing and doing the other thing. Why? And he is. So in any other mythology, in any Mediterranean mythology, he would be the devil. He would be an evil demon that must be destroyed at all costs. But no, he is actually a god. He is the god of lies. And the Germanics worship him and sacrifice to him. Why? Because they understand that because they think that sometimes a man needs to lie, needs to be deceptive, needs to be against honor. They warn you, don't overdo it because you'll get caught. And if you get caught, it's shame, it's dishonor, and it's very unpleasant to everybody involved, especially you. Because, if you get caught, you get punished. You get punished. But they don't have scruples about the act of lying or deceiving itself.
So Rome's antagonist Arminius, when he was defeated at his last battle, he decided he was going to run away, and he just covered his face with blood so no one should recognize him, and he fled on a horse.
Yes, exactly.
So
And
engaging in deception.
yeah, but this is very tame stuff compared to what Germanics engaged in. They, for example,
Well, I mean, they would drown deserters and so on. So that's why, for a sort of cult, according to Tacitus, so for a culture that puts that sort of emphasis, being the guy to run away is something of a big deal.
yes, absolutely. And but consider, for example, we mentioned the Anglo-Saxon. The Anglo-Saxon invasion started from Anglo-Saxon mercenaries thinking in the service of Romanized Britons, thinking this place looks nice, not too heavily defended. You know what? I should call some of the guys back home.
Looks like we can pull off something. And as a matter of fact, this is not something that the Saxons tried to hide. This is a very large element in early Saxon poetry about Vortigern, the king of Britain, and how he essentially brought the Saxon invasion on himself by showing the Saxons how rich and defenseless his country is. Of course, modern historian is saying that there are some exaggerations and simplification, but it's poetry. But essentially, the way all Germanic invasion into the Roman Empire, into Roman Protestant start, is by Germanic mercenaries coming home and saying, "Hey, we have some opportunity here. Let's do something together. Let's do something. Let's get something done."
Yes, and ironically, you mentioned before about the supremacy of Odin, god of wisdom and so on, and you would think such a warlike people would have their god of war to be the chief god, and he's not.
No, he's not. The god of war or the god of fighting is Thor, and Thor is very loved by the Germanics, but he is not the chief god because Thor is a kind of a blunt instrument, and like a true warrior, he wanders the earth in search of adventure, because he's a young god. He's still building up his reputation. Odin is established. He's the old wizened chieftain. He saw everything. He did everything, and he is already.
He's not so hot-headed, perhaps.
He's not so hot-headed. He doesn't.
He knows all the runes,
and he is preparing for. He's preparing for the fight for the long game, because he knows at the end of days, the Fenris wolf would come and swallow him, and he is busy for the entirety of history. He is busy building up his fortress Valhalla, the hall of the slain. By the way, his wife Freya is busy in fortifying and manning Vingolf, the hall, which is the hall of golden victory, among the and she does it among the elves, in which he collects those who died in battle, but who died in glorious battle, but she collects those who died beautifully. So together they collected an army to fight off the last battle that the gods will fight in the end of days, and which
is that why he's doing all these? So the runes that you mentioned are related to war. Is partly his obsession with becoming the master of war?
Yes, because he knows there's a great war coming in the end of days, and he better be ready.
And you're referring to Ragnarok, and you mentioned before the wolf. What did you call it?
The Fenris wolf.
Fenris wolf. And is this wolf spawn of Loki, who you mentioned before?
And of Odin himself.
And of Odin himself.
Yes.
Surprise twist.
Yes. It's a very long and unpleasant story how Odin and Loki came to have a child together, but this is one of the children of Loki. And the children of Loki are...
Loki is sometimes depicted as female?
Oh, no, because...
Two males are having a child here.
No, at one time Loki turned himself into a female horse, into a mare, and Odin, who was at the time for some reason disguised himself as a male, as a stallion. Okay,
I'm getting a very Zeus theme over here.
Yes, but that's that's on steroids. That's something. Even the Greeks were not that. Even Greek myth was not not that weird, because the Greek myth, at least, the gods had the decency to pursue human beings, not each other in this fashion, because the Fenris wolf is a product of rape, as is and Loki, by the way, he is the father of monsters. He gives birth to all sorts of monsters when he is he has some godly children, but those are slaughtered by Odin
as a punishment for betraying the gods at a certain point, or would be, or were they. It's very difficult to distinguish between past, present, and future in the Germanic myth.
Yes, and unlike the real God, who is above time, these people are wallowing in it.
Yes. The real God, the Hebrew God, the God of Israel, is above time himself, but he gives things in a very but he describes time in a linear fashion. He says, "I am above time, and I surveys from above." And so, in the beginning, I created. In the middle, I chose these people. In the future, I would redeem and elevate these people and the world as a whole.
It's hard to move on from theology to a movie recommendation, but before we do that, anything you would like to add on Odin's poem?
Well, it's a very strange little poem. Not little. It's like a page. It's like,
The little part that you read, it's long in its entirety.
yes, exactly. But it's clearly is. But it was written in a very late time, and the writer clearly is trying to stress and to preserve all that is different between his native religion, Germanic paganism, and Christianity that's gaining more and more traction. And he's trying to stress how much he wants his faith to continue on and to resist the new faith, but he already lost the battle because that's not really how pagan religion worked, especially not the Germanic religion. At first, the Germanics saw Jesus just as another god that it might be useful to worship. And then they become somewhat Christian, and then they become more Christian, and then they start to integrate not only worshipping Jesus but also other Christian teachings. Eventually, Christianity replaces paganism wholesale, but it's a very gradual process, and this is exactly because while the Christians see paganism as opposed to Christianity, or rather Christianity as opposing to paganism, the pagans don't necessarily see this because paganism don't have a set doctrine. Paganism has a way of thinking. It has stories. It has traditional stories. It has almost like a mood. And this is something that's very easy to break, because the mood, and it has ancient ways of doing things, and ancient ways to sacrifice, but it's open to new types of sacrifice and new ways of doing things. And this is why it's brittle, and this is why it cannot really offer you true guidance in the way Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or everything that we understand as religion today can offer you. It does not tell you directly, these actions are good, these actions are bad. You must avoid these actions, speeches, emotions, thoughts. It only tells you gives you a very rough outline of the mysteries that it believes in. But that's it. And it also and that's why it's so cruel. Because in a world without guidance, you are afraid, you are lost. And when you are lost, and you don't have any kind of moral anchor, which paganism cannot offer, the most they can offer is, if you go the way of Loki too far, you will give birth to monsters. Hey, it's very easy to be tempted to go the way of Loki, just a little bit more.
And if you want to read this poem yourself, you could go to Google and put poet Ed Hamaval and get access to it. And moving from our book recommendation to our movie recommendation.
Yes. Here in this movie we would see the primordial fear and strangeness of North European civilization to Mediterranean civilization. or in this case between not Germanics. I know we are talking about Germanics all these episodes, but there's a lot to be said about how strange the Celts, especially the northern Celts of Pictland, or the Picts, were to the Romans as well. And
So-
this is the movie.
It's called The Eagle. We're not going to play the trailer right now. If you want, you could put into YouTube, put in The Eagle official trailer from 2010. Isaac, did you see this movie?
I saw it. It was terrifying.
So that's terrifying good, huh?
Yes, terrifying good.
So we avoided the other movie recommendation, The Gladiator, which hopefully we'll talk about some other time. But tell us, I think one of the themes in the movie is the frontier and crossing over the frontier, which
Yes.
is a terrifying idea for the Romans.
Yes, and the Romans do that because a group of Celtic tribesmen, they stole the eagle of the legion, and the eagle is the symbol of the legion. He is not more than the symbol; he is the embodiment of the spirit of the legion. And we're talking about in a highfalutin symbolistic way. No, the spirit. I'm talking about the actual spirits that the Romans believe inhabit every person in the legions, lives in that eagle. And of course, because this eagle is because they are a Mediterranean civilization, everything is an open. The name of the legion is at the basis of the eagle, and the number of the legion, and everything is. It's the thing that you put in front of yourself to declare who you are, what's your name, what is your collective name, what is your number, and in what time was your legion established, how many battles we fought, how many you won, and how many you were defeated, in etc. 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 That's a very Mediterranean idea. And then the barbarians capture it, the greatest shame. And a Roman soldier is crossing the frontier with his Celtic slave to try to recover it. And you'll have to find out what happened for yourself. It's a beautiful movie. To really capture how strange life beyond the Roman frontier was to the Romans, and the actual spirit of Celtic Germanic of Celtic Germanic cultures at this time period, and that's all I have to say about it.
Yes, come back for episode 9. We're going to be continuing discussing the roots of liberty, and we're moving on to the Judaic roots of liberty and modernity. So if you want to recap, we've been going through the roots of liberty. We started with the Bronze Age civilization, an era before liberty in a fashion. We spoke about the ancient Greeks, the Athenians and the Spartans. We've now talked about the Germans and their consuls, and we're next moving on to the Jews. See us in the next episode.
Have a great week, or 2 weeks, depends when we meet again.